Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
There's no going back now, Jono.
Oh my goodness.
That's it. Is the dog there? Have you got the dog?
Dog isn't here, actually. No,
no dog again. You didn't have him last time either.
She is in the house, but she's somehow in a different room. But I bet in a minute, when somebody else will open another door, and she's going to start scratching at the door.
All right. Okay. Well, I was worried maybe I said something to offend her. Maybe she doesn't want to be in the podcast anymore. Okay. All right. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like you to meet my esteemed co-host. He's the one, he's the only ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, David. How are you?
Yeah. Well, you know what, Jonathan? We're going back to school today, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're going back to school because we're talking about a couple films about school. And
yes.
These are films that I think deserve extra credit for being so darn good.
A-stars, I think.
That's right, gold stars all around for these films tonight. We've picked a couple of films because we wanted to talk about teenagers, didn't we, tonight?
We did.
Because we thought there's a lot of talk about teenagers at the moment. And people are always talking about teenagers, but it seems there's a lot. And one of my boys is now entering the teen years.
Oh, wow.
So I've got a teenager living under my roof, and it's interesting, an interesting time for him and for us as the family. And so we thought it'd be cool to go back to school and try and get a teenager's eye view of the world. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
I think that is true, yes. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. So we've both selected a film to talk about. We've done our little swap. We've gone away and we've watched these films, and we thought tonight we'd sit down and have a little chat about them and talk about what we thought of them. And I think tonight we've decided to go chronologically with the films.
Yes.
And there are two kind of quite, one is an absolute bona fide all-time classic of the British cinema.
Yes.
An absolute, and also the second Ken Loach film that we've talked about here on the show.
Yes. Yeah.
We talked about a more recent film of his called Sorry We Missed You back last year on one of the shows. But it's great. It's always great to talk about Ken Loach, one of Britain's finest, greatest filmmakers, because I love Ken Loach. I think he's awesome, and he's made many a fine film, and he's just an all-round cool guy as well. Yes, so we're talking about his film Kes tonight, and that's the film that you selected tonight.
It is, yes.
And a little bit later on in the show, we're going to leave late 60s northern Britain, and we're going to go across the channel over to France to a more contemporary setting and a more contemporary high school to talk about a film called The Class. Or in France, it's called, I'm not going to try and say the French, I'm just going to call it Between the Walls, which is what the French title was.
Yes.
You can try and say that if you like, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's called Entre les Murs.
Oh, that you sounded completely French there, just for a moment. So that was lovely, and it's a really interesting film. And I'm looking forward to talking about that. And it was my pick. But first, we're going to talk about Kes. And Jonathan, this was your pick tonight, so I'm going to hand it over to you to give a little introduction to the film.
Yes, well, funny enough, because this book, it comes from a novel by a chap called Barry Hines, who also wrote the screenplay. And the cover in the sort of 70s and 80s was of the hero of the film, this young lad. And he's basically got his fingers up like this on the front of it, and which is a sort of like sort of a rude symbol in the UK. If you're in America, I suppose it doesn't mean the same. It's like putting up your middle finger, basically, but it's putting up two.
Oh, wasn't it the Churchill thing? V for victory, wasn't
Well,
that?
I think he was like he had both up. He did both actually. Sometimes it was this way, sometimes it was this way, and apparently it comes from sort of the Middle Ages when British archers were taunting the French because they used their fingers to sort of shoot the arrows at the French in Agincourt and all these battles they were fighting in France. Not sure if that's true, but that's one of the legends. Anyway, he was on the front going like this. So
that's a brilliant factoid moment there.
Good factoid, definitely a good factoid. But that was a bit rude. So it was always like a little bit of an edgy book. It was obviously a bit edgy, and it was a GCSE set text for some of my friends, but not for me for some reason. So I was always aware of the book and the film, but I'd never seen it. God knows why, but I hadn't. And so the reason I chose this subject this time, teenagers, because there's this film, TV series called Adolescence on Netflix, which is getting a lot of attention now, and it's set in funnily enough, it's set in a northern sort of secondary school.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons I thought Kes was a good choice. And then since then, I found that the director of Adolescence, the writer and director, his favourite film is Kes. And not only that, he obviously is a big Barry Hines fan, the writer of the book and the screenplay, because his production company, which is, I think, Brad Pitt somehow involved with it, they're going to remake one of Barry Hines's other sort of key scripts, which is called Threads, which is all about a nuclear explosion in Sheffield.
Yes, that's the TV film is quite a powerful film, actually.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're going to remake that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's being remade by Stephen Graham's company.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's a good time to revisit that because all our politicians at the minute seem so flippant about starting wars with Russia that it's kind of might be a good idea to remind them exactly what the potential outcome of such an enterprise might be.
Yes. Yeah. Well, exactly. And so all these sort of connections made me think this is a really good sort of choice, basically. Yeah. And so this, I think, not sure what Adolescence is set. This film, Kes, is. The funny thing is, I always thought it was called Kes. Although it's Kes, it is actually Kes, short for kestrel.
Kestrel, yes, the bird in the film. It's the name of the bird in the film, isn't it? Exactly. Sorry, folks, for the spoiler.
Well, yeah, I will get to the bird. I'm definitely going to mention the bird. So basically, the story is there's this young lad who's 14, which I think the boy in Adolescence is 13, so there's some similar ages again. And he lives with his mum and his elder brother. His elder brother's in his 20s, I guess, and works in a mine. His mum, I can't remember what she does, but basically it's an extremely sort of poverty-stricken household he lives in. And he goes to this
community, the whole community.
The whole community. And he goes to the school, which is extremely brutal. It's what part of the interesting thing about the film is looking at it. It's because it's sort of social realist. It's quite. I mean, it was filmed in the school where Barry Hines, the screenwriter, had worked himself as a teacher. It employed lots of teachers and sort of school children as sort of actors. Yeah. And it's very close to the community it's made in, this film. Yeah. And you see how I mean, sort of, well, things were in the 60s. There's a sort of handful of cars, not very many. The,
Yeah.
and you can go and look at the locations. I think the school's been knocked down now, unfortunately, but you could see the streets back then were just all the streets were sort of black with basically coal soot.
Yeah, the soot just all over the buildings and everything is just grimy and
Yeah.
it
Now
just
they've all been scrubbed and look a lot better. You can see the stone again, and it's just well, it's an amazing snapshot of a time, and it's got this extraordinary story. This boy is always basically getting into trouble with the sort of authorities at school, and it's called Kess because he decides to train a kestrel,
hmm,
which is a bird of prey. Like the sort of medieval knights had these things on their fingers and whatnot. And so he captures this little uh, sort of young kestrel, and he trains it up. He basically gets a book, and
he steals a book from a
steals.
secondhand shop.
Yes.
Yeah.
He
Because
learns.
he tries to go to the library to take out a book, but they
Yeah,
won't let him take out a book because he can't sign up for the form and get someone to sign it to say that he's okay to take out a book. So he
yeah,
then goes and steals a book
from
from
the
a local
bookshop.
shop.
Yeah, exactly. And so learns how to train it. And somebody says they have a discussion about it at one stage, and he says, yeah, "I'm not taming it. You can't tame a kestrel. You train it, which is a different thing. Which is because it's still wild. And that's the part of the sort of beauty of this bird is it remains a wild animal.
Mm,
And it does come to you, and you can train it, but you can't tame it. And
mm,
that wildness is this thing that gives him a sort of a view on something else that he doesn't have in his life, a freedom and a sort of escape.
mm,
And it's an extremely moving film, really, really good. I really, really enjoyed it.
mm.
And yeah, it's funny enough. One of the stories about it is that Disney liked it so much. The story they wanted to buy it and turn it into a Disney film.
Oh my goodness.
Uh,
Like a
which,
cartoon.
well, no, I don't think a cartoon, like a sort of live action film. But basically, it's not giving too much away. It's got a bit of a sad ending. But they wanted a happy ending, and the screenwriter said, "No, you've got to have my sad ending." And so it never got bought. But you can sort of see in a way that what they saw in it, because it's got this, yeah, this compelling relationship, yeah, and I guess they like sort of British animal stories like 101 Dalmatians and Lassie and things like this.
And the fox one. What's the name of that fox one? I can't remember now, but there's a.
Yeah, sort of all those ones.
Yeah,
Was it the one about the pig as well?
yeah.
Anyway, so basically, this was part of that sort of thing. And anyway, it's an absolutely terrific film. And some say it's one of the best British films sort of ever made.
I definitely think it might be a contender. It's
It's up there. It's up
absolutely.
there with the great British films. I think
Yeah.
it's definitely worth a watch. So, have you seen it before, David?
I had seen it before, a few years back when I got the Blu-ray because I collect the
Oh, yeah,
Master of the Cinema
yeah,
series, and when this came out, I watched the film, and that was the first time I watched it. So that was a few years back,
right,
and so it was great when you picked it because I was quite keen. It had been a few years, so I was very happy to revisit it.
right.
It really struck me too this time about in the school, just the incredible bleakness of this situation, this
Yeah,
community, and also just the conditions in the school. Like looking at it from a 2025 perspective, just the absolute horrendous way that these children are treated in this school is
yeah.
just absolutely appalling.
The headmaster,
Um,
especially, he is.
oh, the headmaster, he never says anything. He just screams and yells at them and just really aggressive.
Yeah,
And he never listens or takes any time to get to know the children or anything. He just like is just this abusive, obnoxious, horrible man.
Yeah, it's
and
slightly comical
and
actually.
he's not the only one. Like most of the teachers are like that. And and this is back in a time when corporal punishment was still a thing. It was
Yeah,
kind of like just an accepted part of
yeah,
being at school, at least in Britain. I can't really say
yeah,
so much in North America, but
yeah.
because even when I was growing up, it was kind of frowned upon
Brilliant.
at that point.
Yeah,
But it's just extraordinary that the abuse that these children take,
yeah,
and over and sometimes whether they deserve it or not, or like even like how could you even argue that they on any level that they deserve that kind of treatment? It's just appalling. And
yeah,
you just think too, because this poor boy gets it at home as well. He goes home and his
yeah,
brother, who he has to share a room with, not just share a room, but share a bed with.
yeah, yeah,
This and his older brother is
yeah,
just this thug,
yeah.
just horrible
Really, really
thug
horrible.
of a man, just completely, totally unpleasant and charmless in
Yeah,
every sense of the word. And just he just is abused morning, noon, and night. He has
yeah,
a paper round, and at the beginning they show him he has to get up really early in the morning, and he basically steals a bit of food from the milkmen and stuff just so he can have some breakfast because
mm,
nobody's feeding him or anything.
no,
And then his mom just she's around, but she doesn't really seem to be around or
no,
engaged at all in his life. And he goes to just when he goes to the shop to pick up his papers for the paper route, the man in the shop just abuses him and is really horrible and
yeah,
unpleasant to him first
yeah,
thing in the morning, giving him trouble for almost being late. So
yes,
he's not even late, he's almost late, and he
yeah,
still gets in trouble.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
So, just like this, just constant torrential sort of emotional and sometimes physical abuse
yeah,
that this poor boy is subjected to all the time.
yeah, it's true.
Just
There's
is
basically,
extraordinary.
I think, really there's only one teacher who's nice to him.
Yeah.
I think the milkman's quite nice to him
The
as well.
milkman seems nice. Yeah. And it seems to be oblivious to the fact that he's stealing from him. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And I'm not sure. Are there any other students who are nice, fellow
Well,
students?
he seems to get on with a couple of the other kids, but then there's a lot of bullying and sort
A
of,
lot of bullying, and there's one guy who's the
stuff
bully,
that's,
isn't he?
yeah. And you have this community where, like, they're all quite obviously poverty, they're all living at a certain level of sort of poverty or just, maybe just slightly above the poverty
Yeah,
level.
yeah,
And this community where a lot of the kids are just expected to go down the mines,
yeah,
like his brother.
yeah,
And, so there is this extraordinarily bleak kind of atmosphere, oppressiveness world that this boy lives in.
yes,
So when he finds this bird, it's like the one thing that kind of gives him this little sense of freedom and a bit of, I guess, control over something,
yeah,
and something that he can focus his attention on in a positive way. And
yeah.
I think and that is really, really beautiful, isn't it? Really
It's
quite
very
quite.
beautiful, literally, because he goes out into the woods quite often and sort of wanders around in the summer with all the sort of light playing in the leaves and everything. And
Mm,
there's this really beautiful sort of flute music, very sort of 60s hippie flute music that gets made. And
yeah.
it's really nice, actually. And yeah, this extraordinary connection with the bird, which has now become a bit, I guess it's a bit more contemporary. There was this book that came out a few years ago, H is for Hawk, if you
Mm,
heard about that. And the woman who wrote it, her father had recently died, and she was sort of experiencing the sort of grief of that. And she decided to sort of train a hawk.
mm,
And so it became there was like quite a lot of discussion of sort of birds of prey and what it means to encounter one. And there's this really beautiful scene. So one of the only nice teacher is
Mm.
this chap called Mr. Farthing,
Yes.
and he's the only Oscar winner in the film. So he won
Oh,
an Oscar for his screenplay for Chariots of Fire later
oh,
on.
right. Oh, okay. That's very interesting. I did not know that. I didn't know there was a connection there at all. That's
Yes,
very interesting.
yeah, yeah,
And
and
this scene that you're going to describe is like it's my favorite moment in the film. But I'll let you
oh, it's
go ahead.
beautiful. So he hears about Billy, the boy, going to and goes to sort of see him, and he keeps it in the shed in the back of his in the back garden or in the backyard,
Yeah, yeah,
and they go in there and they sort of talk in hushed tones in front of the
yeah,
thing, and they sort of talk about the sort of the reverence you have to have for these animals because they're such extraordinary creatures,
yeah,
and it's amazing. It's really beautiful, really powerful little scene there.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
uh,
that wasn't the scene I thought you were going to talk about, but
was it not? Oh, right.
no, because I thought you were going to mention about in the class when with Mr. Farthing is I
And
guess
that's another great thing.
he's trying to get the kids and interestingly there's a very similar scene in the second film that we're going to talk about
Yeah,
later, but he's trying to get the kids to talk about themselves in the class to discuss something that they're interested in or a hobby that they have. And then obviously the boy doesn't really want to, he's too shy and he doesn't really want to say anything, but one of his mates in the class says, "Oh, he's got this bird." And
mm,
so Mr. Farthing makes him get up and talk about it.
yeah,
And once he starts to talk about it, he suddenly becomes like he just becomes alive, talking about his interest. And it's really beautiful how he describes about the training the bird and how anxious he was the first time he let the bird go, and because he knew that it might
yeah,
run off on him, take off on him,
yeah,
and he would lose him. And he talked about that experience and how he felt, and
yeah,
that is like this incredibly powerful, poignant
mm,
moment in the film, just really beautiful,
yeah,
where this boy suddenly everybody's listening to him and is hanging on what he's saying, and he
yeah,
suddenly describes it very almost poetically and beautifully about how he felt and how important it all is to him, and describing all the details,
yeah,
because this is a kid and they show him in other classes getting picked on and the teachers being kind of abusive and sarcastic when he doesn't know an answer to a question, or he doesn't say something or stand up at the right time, or just this constant emotional abuse.
yeah,
But then this one moment where suddenly he's able to articulate something and everybody's listening to him and he's the center of attention, and it's something that's really important to him.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I just think that's an incredibly really, really powerful, moving moment in the
Very, really
film.
powerful. Yeah, that
Yeah,
bit and the one in the shed,
yeah,
the two key bits, and there's one little shot in that. There's one boy who's sort of got his head on his hands, and he's got this sort of smirk on his face, like this is all rubbish, sort of thing.
mm,
And then a split second later, he obviously, actually, this is the most amazing thing I've heard at school. Basically,
yeah, yeah,
suddenly he listens. He goes from being, I'm too cool for this, to this is absolutely brilliant. And it's just like um, 3 or 4 seconds of film, and it
yeah,
just says so much. And but
yeah,
the other interesting thing that it shares in common with the bit in the shed is everybody's becomes quiet.
yeah,
That sort of silence when
yeah.
their sort of chatter is sort of silence and sort of,
Yeah, because you're quite right. Because a key thing about the film is often there's just constant noise, isn't
yeah,
there? And
yeah,
everybody's always shouting and just the noise always. But in those moments, there's quiet
yeah,
in the face of nature, really, and
yeah,
about talking about something outside of their normal kind of existence or
Yeah.
how they see their existence. So you're absolutely right. That's a really beautiful moment in the shed as well. And
Yeah.
it's also a time when he has, even if it's just for that brief moment, the relationships that he has with these authority figures kind of changes because this
Yeah.
one man is actually taking an interest in
Yeah.
him and in his interests and is listening to him
Yeah.
and kind of being respectful in a sense too
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah. Very
he's
respectful.
respecting his knowledge and the things that he's learned on
Yeah.
his own. So you're right. It's a really really pivotal sort of shift at
Yeah.
that moment, and these because and again like I think those moments tie in really nicely with some key moments in the next film as well, which I
Yes.
think really ties them together beautifully.
Yeah.
But it's just that idea about um, it is should education be something that we, top down, sort of drive into people,
Yeah.
or is it most effective when we let
Draw it out of them.
people, yeah, we let it come out of them when
Yeah.
they're pursuing their own interests and the things that matter to them and that they pick up on the paths that they want to follow
Yeah.
is when they really come alive and when they really engage with things. And so it really brings out the difference between the kind of institutionalized kind of um, top down sort of hierarchical approach to education
Yeah.
and another, maybe there's a glimpse at another way of looking at how people learn and how they engage with things.
Yeah.
So I think that is quite touching and quite moving in the film.
Yeah. Really much. Very much indeed.
Uh,
Yeah. It's really beautiful, beautiful film. Actually, um, I really enjoyed it a lot, uh, and it's because it does have this sort of, I guess it is. You could see it as well. It is sort of grim, but it's also quite a hopeful film.
I think so. I think it is like because you mentioned the ending. It has a little bit of a downer ending,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I don't read the film as like a negative film or a. I think it's quite beautiful because
Yeah.
it shows that everyone has that. No matter how bleak their circumstances, there is that hope of finding the things that they can hang on to that motivate them and give
Yeah.
them purpose and hope and creativity and all those things that are kind of the best things out of people.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
they're there even in this poor boy who's kind of you kind of see he doesn't have a huge amount of options or necessarily you don't you're kind of left wondering what kind of future he's going to have.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, well, actually he's quite resourceful, and when he sets his mind to something that he's really interested in, he makes it happen. And
Yeah.
he actually demonstrates some really good key qualities that actually make you think, well, maybe he could. Because the film ends with that scene with the man at the job center or whatever that is, where they take the kids one by one
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
talk about career. Because I guess at his age, at this point, he's not pursuing a higher education,
No.
probably because he didn't achieve the right sort of scores or whatever to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So it's understood he's going to leave school at a young age and go into the workforce.
Yeah.
So there's this moment when he goes to discuss with this sort of career advisor about what he's going to do. And of course, the boy doesn't know because he doesn't really understand any of this. But you do think, why doesn't he mention about the birds? Because maybe
Yeah.
there is some sort of a career path for
Yeah.
someone who he could work in a zoo or he could work in a
Yeah.
conservation thing or in
Yeah.
a park or
Yeah.
he has skills and he has abilities and interests that he potentially could have a good
Definitely.
future.
Well, it's interesting the story behind Barry Hines himself. So I think he went to this school. He taught at this school, but he grew
Mm.
up in the village where Billy lives, I think. And so I think he basically went to a grammar school, which is the sort of more academic schools then. But he basically was sort of decided to go his own path and ended up working in a mine, even though if you'd been to grammar school, most people didn't go and work in a mine then.
Mm.
And anyway, so the story goes, he was working in the mine, the coal face, and he was sort of talking to the guy next to him. And the guy says, what are you doing? And he told him his story. And he said, what the hell are you doing down here then? Working in a mine. You've been to a grammar school. You should be doing something better with your life. And he went, yeah, perhaps I'm letting myself down a bit, because he just didn't want to be pushed into the sort of career that everybody expected for him. But anyway, he thought, well, I'm just being stubborn. So then he did his teacher training course and became a teacher. And then it was after the children had gone home that he wrote his first book. And then he became a writer and a sort of novelist and screenwriter and all that sort of stuff. So who knows? Perhaps Billy could have, the fact that there was a way out, as there was for Barry Hines himself. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, that's the takeaway that I get from the film, especially after revisiting it now.
Yeah.
I saw it as kind of a hopeful film in a sense, because I think in a sense he demonstrates that he has the capacity to rise above his circumstances.
Definitely.
And I guess I kind of walked away from the film feeling like he will, he might,
yeah,
despite the sort of the circumstances that he's in.
Exactly, he has the distinct possibility that he will rise above it, like a kestrel, fly off.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really good film.
Yeah, just a wonderful film, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I think it's worth just mentioning too about the quite extended, because it never struck me before, but rewatching it this time, it's quite a lengthy segment, but the bit about the football.
Oh yeah, that's another thing I want to mention. Yes,
and the Brian Glover, who's just an absolutely terrific actor, who's been in all sorts of stuff, but he's absolutely just so brilliant in this. And that whole scene, the whole bit on the pitch with these poor kids in their t-shirts and shorts, freezing out there, kicking the ball around, and this man in his sort of, his one moment of sort of self-perpetuated ego as he runs around kicking the ball. To me, that kind of encapsulates my view of, because I'm not really into sports and things, and certainly football, which again plays an interesting part in the second film that we're going to talk about. It plays a quite pivotal catalyst in the second film as well. But in this scene, that sort of encapsulates to me how I view sort of sports, like, football.
That's how I remember it when I was sort of young, with just the driving rain, the water pouring in over the waterlogged sort of turf into my boots, thinking, people like this? Anyway, but the other thing so this is an interesting bit, that football scene, or soccer scene, we could call it. So basically, Mr. Sugden is one of the other, and he's another guy who was a teacher who acted in this film, but unlike the headmaster, that was his one and only sort of film role, I think. Brian Glover was such a success that he became an actor until he died afterwards. It's a nice story.
Quite a recognizable sort of character actor in many British film and television shows, and just very talented guy.
Very talented.
And you can see it in this film, because right from when he comes on, just absolutely brilliant, just very funny,
But
and also a bit scary.
yeah,
And you can, and just absolutely extraordinary
well,
scene.
that's the thing about this film is quite grim in some ways, but there is this humor. It's not. I mean, there's this Brian Glover, his scene. It's sort of he's on the verge of being hilarious. I mean, it is funny. It's very funny.
He is
Also,
very funny, but at the same time, he's such a horrible man, and
yeah,
especially to our protagonist Billy, that he just absolutely just horrendous,
yeah,
and it actually at one it like physically abusive towards this boy,
yeah.
and just horrendous bully and just a horrible man, really.
But
But it is he is very funny as
it's
well,
funny,
just
and I think
because
that's the
the
thing about the
sheer
headmaster.
absurdity of it.
The
Sorry,
headmaster,
say again?
sorry, the headmaster is also quite funny. He's
Yeah, yeah,
less funny, but he's sort of so over the top, it's laughable.
yeah.
And so
No,
I
but
wonder,
very realistic in a sense, though, because even though you think like this isn't like played in a way like of exaggeration, because Ken Loach's style is very much he uses a lot of non-professional actors,
yeah,
gets right in there, and he sort of just shows things in that sort of real
yeah,
socially realistic sort of kitchen sink
yeah,
style of filmmaking that he's very famous for doing. And he's always, even right up to the film that we talked about more, the more recent film,
yeah,
that's kind of the way his style of filmmaking.
yeah,
So there's no sort of exaggeration or playing things up, or there's no affectation here.
yeah,
It is just feels really like almost kind of documentary like in its quality. And that headmaster, I can totally see that. I
yeah,
mean, remembering from my youth, I can remember certain teachers though and their ways. I mean, certainly I don't recall having any teachers that were just that outright abusive and aggressive like that, but also the situation is different in the fact that
yeah,
this is this community in this school where it's based in the circumstances and the geography of it.
yeah.
It feels very realistic.
Yes,
um,
but I would say that one of the things I read about it, they said he's similar to the character Wackford Squeers, who's the cruel, one-eyed Yorkshire schoolmaster who runs a school in Charles Dickens' Nicholas Nickleby.
right, yeah.
Because
Well,
he's
I guess that's to do about the perception, because I remember, I guess, yeah, if you think about Dickens and you think about like the film If, the Lindsay Anderson film,
yeah,
and all that kind of stuff. I guess me as a sort of expat Canadian who moved to England,
yeah,
and then I see all this stuff, and I kind of, and also just talking to people too. Like over the years, people have told me stories about what their experiences they had in school,
yeah,
things like that. And so that is kind of looking at Kess that very much fits in with my perception
yeah,
of what would probably would have
yeah,
been like going to high school in 1969
yeah,
in a northern mining community in England.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
maybe someone who lived under those circumstances can, come back with a different
yeah.
perspective on that. And please do comment or write us an email or send us a message or whatever. We'd
That's
love
one
to
of
hear that, because I would love to hear that, because is Cass an accurate reflection of what life was really like at that time in those places, or is it maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Yeah, not sure. But thinking of If, because that was one of the other ones I wondered if I should choose that. But I think this is a better, more appropriate choice.
Yeah,
Um, but another film that's similar to If is Young Winston,
yeah,
which is a Richard Attenborough film.
yeah,
And so the first half is all about Winston Churchill's school, where he's
mm,
always being whacked as well.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that is certainly, like, I don't think there's any dispute, because I've talked to many people who grew up here in this country, and
Yeah,
the whacking the fingers with a ruler and all those kind of things are that's real stuff that really went on, and it
Yeah.
seemed to have been like just an accepted part of going to school
Mhm.
at those times. Corporal
Yeah.
punishment was a thing,
Yeah.
and these teachers were, you know, you know,
Whacking away.
like I mean, it's abuse, pure and simple.
Yeah.
That's from a contemporary perspective.
Yeah.
That's that's what that is. That's
Yeah.
physical abuse, is what
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah.
It's assault and battery is what it is.
Yeah.
But obviously, then they took a different view on it, and
They
it
did.
was an accepted practice
Yeah.
that just went on, and that was just the way things were done.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But one sort of winding up, two things I'd like to say.
Mhm.
Um, one is that despite its sort of grim subject matter, it's not a grim film.
No,
And you could see why, and it's that hopefulness that I think appealed to the sort of Disney executives. And that's why they wanted to buy
yeah,
the story. Because it is hopeful. And the other thing is that it is number 7 in the BFI's list of top 100 British films. Um, so just after Kind Hearts and in between Kind Hearts and Coronets and Don't Look Now. So
well,
that is,
it's in good company. Very,
yeah,
those are both excellent films as well, and
exactly.
yeah, it definitely deserves its place up there. And yes, you're quite right to stress to listeners, if you've not seen the film and we've given you the impression that it's this really downbeat, grim sort of, film about this boy being abused by everybody.
Yeah,
I mean, that is kind of the setting, but I think the whole point of the film really is to demonstrate that this boy finds some hopefulness and some beauty
yeah,
within that situation, and that's really what the film's about. And I think it's a really beautiful, very moving film, and definitely don't get the impression that it's going to be bum you out, because it's not.
no. It's
So on that note, is there anything else that you wanted to say, Jonathan, before we
No, I mean it was he was living in a sort of, as you said earlier, it was a sort of generation that never listens, basically.
yeah,
A sort of, but it's I really enjoyed the film. I thought, well, because some of these films I've been watching in bits because I just don't have the time in sort of two halves. But this one, it's an hour and 40 minutes, but it also, so it's sort of manageable. But also, I just didn't want to stop because I just thought this is absolutely brilliant. So that's an
yeah.
endorsement.
Well, absolutely, folks. You want to go and check it out as soon as possible. I'm pretty sure I didn't look. I don't know if you did, Jonathan. I don't know how easily it's accessible on. We're recording this in April of 2025. How did you watch it?
I watched it on Prime. Actually, it came up on Prime saying this is leaving free Prime soon.
Oh, okay.
So I watched it with ads. Luckily, it wasn't. The ads weren't in the middle. Thank goodness, they were just at
Okay.
the beginning and the end, which is fine. And yeah, so that's where I watched it.
Okay, so it is available on streaming, and hopefully, folks, whenever you listen to this and you decide to go check out the film, it will be accessible to you. I think it's a pretty classic film, so I'd be surprised if you had a hard time finding it. And I'll just show this again. I have absolutely no idea. Um, this came out in 2016, so there you go. So it's long ago than I thought. But this is the Masters of Cinema range from Eureka, and this Blu-ray is excellent. It's really beautiful transfer, and it's got some really good stuff, extra things on it, like a BFI interview with Ken Loach, and it's got alternate soundtracks, because apparently when it was first released in America, they dubbed over some of the heavy accents so that American audiences could understand what they were saying.
I was wondering about that because they have
Yeah,
very thick accents. Even me, who sort of struggled,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm used to it now because I've lived here for years, so I don't struggle that much with those kind of things. But I can see how people, if they're not used to hearing these heavy northern accents, that they might struggle a little bit. So
Yeah.
apparently, the in United Artists, when they released it in America, they did get the same actors to dub their voices so that it was a little bit more clear, a
Oh,
little bit
really? Oh,
easier for
interesting.
American audiences to understand. And
Okay.
so they've included that alternate soundtrack on the
Okay.
disc. And they've also got, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and read through all this because I'm not, you know, just go and search it out because it's a very, very good edition of the disc.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that it's available in North America in the Criterion collection.
Right.
So for people in North America, you can go down the shop and buy a copy on Criterion, which
Yeah.
I'm sure is probably, they do excellent editions as well. So I'm sure that's great as well. So on that note, folks, go and seek it out.
Definitely.
But right now, I'm going to take a recess, and I understand that Jonathan has a detention. So we're going to go and sort that out. And then we're going to take a little break. For you listening, you'll find it's only going to be mere seconds. And then we'll be back to talk about our second film, the 2008 French film called The Class. And it's excellent indeed. So we'll be right back to talk about that.
Yep.
And we'll see you then.
You're done. Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the podcast.
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners, and welcome back, Jonathan. But you better get your stuff because we're late for class. We got to get to Mr. Marin's class.
Mara. What's up, Mara?
Well, yes. So, folks, welcome back to the show. And we are going to talk now about our second feature.
Yes.
About our high school double bill. It's a 2008 French film, and it won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival.
Yeah.
And quite a lot of the films we end up talking about, quite a lot of films are Palme d'Or winners, aren't they?
They tend to be.
Yeah, more so than sort of Oscar winners. We tend to talk about Palme d'Or winners.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realise. And then when the credits came up, it had the sort of golden palm at the beginning. I thought, what? Did this win the Palme d'Or? You didn't tell me that when you suggested it.
Well, I didn't know, to be honest. I don't really, I must admit, I'm not one for following that kind of thing. I don't really pay that close attention to awards seasons and all that kind of stuff. But it's the kind of, obviously, as I was researching the film and looking into it a bit more, I saw, it won the Palme d'Or, which quite often seems to be the case every time we talk about film.
Yeah.
So I guess perhaps my tastes align with the Cannes Film Festival for some reason.
Must do. They should get you down there.
Well, I'm available. You guys want to give me a call? I might be up for that, especially if someone's going to pay for the hotel and everything. But anyway, on that note, let's talk about The Class. This is a brilliant film, and this is a little bit out of the ordinary in the fact that I was explaining to you before we came on tonight that usually when I select my film for the film swap, I tend to pick films that I'm familiar with, and so things that I can recommend. But this was a case where I hadn't seen this film, and when you proposed the topic, I went away and I had a little think, and this one kind of made the shortlist just because it was a film that I remember when it came out. It looked really, really interesting, and I remember there was a lot of discussion around it.
Yeah.
and it won the Palme d'Or, although I didn't really register that at the time, maybe. And I always wanted to see it. I was always interested in seeing it. So
Right.
when you proposed this subject matter, I this was one of the films that I thought of that. Oh, I've always wanted to see that. So I did something. This was something I picked just because I thought this would be a good opportunity
Hmm.
to see it.
Yeah.
And because I remembered the reception that it got at the time when it came out, I thought it was a relatively safe bet
Yeah.
that it would be an interesting film.
Yeah.
And it is. It's an
Yeah. It was
absolutely fascinating film.
a great film. Fits very well with Kes as well.
Yeah, and it actually does work with Kes really well
Yes.
because it very much like Kes is set in a high school, only this time it's a more contemporary, although this film came out in 2008, so it's not like a new film.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I guess I would look at this as a relatively new film, although I suppose a younger person might think that 20 years ago it's an old film. But I think it's a relatively contemporary film, and it certainly fits in with a contemporary outlook and a contemporary feel.
Yeah.
It also shares with Kef stylistically. It's shot in the same kind of neo-realist kind of documentary style. Sorry, I shouldn't say neo-realist, but more a social realism
Yeah.
style that Kess was made in
Yeah.
that it has kind of like a documentary feel to it. A lot of the performers in the film are kind of non-professional.
Yeah.
So, and it has a very authentic feel to it in terms of making you feel very much that you're in a real classroom with real people. So much so that I actually originally had the perception that this film was, in fact, a documentary.
I really am.
Yeah, but it isn't. But you could be forgiven for thinking it is
Yeah.
because it is that sort of hyper realistic,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely fascinating because what it does is it takes you through a year in one teacher's French class, in this sort of urban. I guess it's set in Paris, isn't it?
Yeah.
In it's in
Yes.
an
Harold.
inner city school in Paris,
Yeah.
and you follow this teacher as he works to engage with what becomes at times quite a confrontational environment in the
Yeah.
classroom. And this teacher is quite different. He stands out from the teachers that we saw in the first film
Yeah.
in the fact that he is takes a much different approach rather than being abusive and aggressive and um, authoritarian in the classroom.
Yeah.
He tries to kind of engage them in a much more sort of laid back kind of style where he tries to kind of engage with them a little bit on their own level
Yeah.
to some extent,
Yeah.
although there are still elements of authoritarianism that kind of creep in
Yeah.
at times in the way that he deals with confrontation within the
Yeah.
classroom. His classroom is built up of a very diverse group of kids. There's sort of white kids and African kids and kids. One of the main characters is his family is from Mali,
Yep.
and a lot of the conflict in the film arises, I think, from some of these kids feel a little bit more isolated or alienated. Is that fair to say from the teaching staff and
Yeah.
maybe from the wider school community?
Yeah.
So they tend to um, in the classroom be a little bit more um, less engaged in directly in the way that he teaches the lessons.
Let's engage. Provocative, I would say.
And yes, well, yes, certainly there's a couple of the girls in the class who are very provocative, who seem
Yeah.
to be uh, constantly trying to provoke controversy or confront the teacher
They like
on the
winding him up,
things that
basically.
Sorry, say again.
They like winding him up.
They like winding him up, and they just like to give him some grief about his choice of words or his his choice of topics or the way that he presents questions.
Yeah,
And to give him his due, he's a pretty cool customer, and he tries very much to engage the kids. And he strikes me, certainly in contrast with the teachers in the Kess film, he strikes me as someone who's quite well-meaning,
he is.
although ultimately it all comes unstuck, doesn't it?
It does.
As the film progresses and certain storylines play out,
Yeah,
certain stories with certain children within the class, conflict arises and it becomes more serious, and it leads to, it culminates in a big blow up
yeah,
that becomes kind of the centerpiece of the film.
yeah.
Now, this film's really interesting in that it is based on a book that was written by a man named Francois Bougainville, and again, my apologies for pronouncing. I should have got Jonathan to do that.
All right.
Usually, I try and trick him into saying the stuff for me so I don't have to, but tonight I had to go. But he also plays the teacher in the film,
Yeah,
and it is very much based on his experiences. The book,
yeah,
and then this film that it's based on is very much based on his experiences
yeah,
working in one of these inner city Paris schools.
yeah,
And so that's quite fascinating because he has a very naturalistic performance.
yeah.
And like I said, the film very much feels like it's a documentary at times.
It does.
So much so that like all the kids in it, everyone and the confrontations that they have and the discussions that they have and the meetings in the school, in the teachers' lounge and stuff where the teachers go for their breaks and things feel really, 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 really realistic, don't they?
Yeah,
And so that's something. The style of the film
yeah,
feels very gritty and real, like you're
yeah,
kind of a fly on the wall
yeah.
during these events. So, anyway, is there anything else that I missed about in terms of introducing this film to
No,
somebody?
no, I think that's right. Not only was the actor and screenwriter a teacher, but his parents have been teachers as well.
Right.
He came from a sort of a line of teachers, you could say. And yeah, so like with Kess, some of I think guess the teachers were probably had been teachers, and definitely the children were sort of playing versions of themselves, I guess. So
Mm.
there's a girl called Esmeralda, and she's played by an actor or actress or whatever called Esmeralda Utani. So,
Mm.
and then there's Carl, who's played by a guy called Carl, and yeah, so there's a number of them have their sort of their own names to make it, I guess, a bit more aligned with the sort of reality of the situation.
Mm.
And yeah, that's yeah, I guess that's another thing that the both screenwriters had been teachers, both of these films.
Yeah. So it definitely brings an interesting perspective on it,
Yeah,
and it deals very much with the sort of this modern classroom environment,
yeah,
and all these different sort of factors that come into play in terms of the diversity of the students and the cultural backgrounds and the changing attitudes of the youth, and technology comes into it because they've all, even though this is 2008 and maybe they weren't the sort of latest kind of smartphones that we're used to having nowadays, technology plays into it. They've all got their phones and they're all taking photographs, and that plays into it.
yeah,
And it's about this teacher just really trying to engage these kids
yeah,
meaningfully in what he's trying to teach them, but
yeah,
at the same time trying to maintain some sort of order and discipline in the classroom,
yeah,
and about how sometimes, much like in Kess, the approach sometimes becomes counterproductive. and it leads to some conflict.
Yeah.
And the central conflict is because there's a young man who always sits at the back of the class and he doesn't engage very much. His name is Suderman,
Yeah.
and he sits at the back of the class and he doesn't really participate very much. And the teacher's constantly trying to bring him out and say, come on, get engaged with this and do your work and try and do this. And this kid just seems like he doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
And he also has a reputation amongst the other staff in the school as being a quote troublemaker
Yeah.
and someone who is kind of a bit of a, they've all kind of given up on him, but
Yeah.
Mr. Marin hasn't really given up on him.
No.
And much like it, because I mentioned in Kess that quite pivotal scene when he's brought up to the front of the class to talk about his bird and
Yeah.
his hobby and how he suddenly comes to life.
Yeah.
And there is a key moment in this film as well when Solomon gets an opportunity to come forward and demonstrate his photography,
Yeah.
because they're doing class presentations, much like that scene in Kess where the teachers ask them to write sort of self portrait of themselves,
Yeah.
that they can come out and stand up in class and talk about themselves and tell people a little bit about themselves. And Soleiman instead takes photographs of people in his life and
Yeah.
things about him that he likes and he's interested in. And then he's encouraged to put these into a little booklet that he makes, and he prints them off in the printer. And then Mr. Marin sticks them all up on the notice board up in the classroom. And suddenly, in that moment, Soleiman rises to that. He's very proud of his work and he feels like people are paying attention to him and taking an interest in him.
Mm.
And he gets praised for what he's done.
Yeah.
And you can immediately see a change in him, in his whole attitude. And in that moment, and it's a really key and really, again, a really beautiful moment where you see this kid shine and he suddenly comes out of himself. And everything you can see at that moment that this could be a sort of a turning point
Yeah.
for him and for Mr. Marin's relationship with him.
Yeah.
But what ultimately happens is it doesn't turn out that way,
It doesn't.
because within the institution of the school, they go through a process where all the teachers sit around and compare notes about all the different students and then decide on grades for them. And when they have this meeting, these two girls that are the kind of the confrontational ones in the classroom are invited to the meeting as student representatives.
Yeah.
And what happens in the course of that meeting is they see Mr. Marin struggle to defend his position, to champion these kids who have this reputation with some of the other staff. And he kind of breaks down, he gets browbeaten by the other teachers into making a comment about Soleiman, which is not very hopeful or complimentary.
No.
And he sort of gives in to the other teachers' viewpoints. And so they mark the boy down. And then the next day, the two girls who were sitting in the meeting as class representatives have obviously gone back and fed back to their classmates some of the things that went on in these meetings. And of course, this boy who was just coming out of his shell a little bit,
Yeah.
and he kind of saw some hope that things might start to turn around for him. Suddenly, he's going right back into his shell because he's heard that Mr. Marin said something not very nice about him.
Yeah.
And again, so I won't spoil what happens for people who haven't seen the film, but this escalates into a much more serious incident, which then we go through the school's disciplinary process with this boy, and we see how the institutionalized sort of attitudes and power structures within the school lead to some negative outcome for some of these students.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways the teacher is he's like the good teacher in Kes, Mr. Farthing,
yeah,
but
yeah.
he's, but I like but the whole film is about him. Well, not about him, but sort of he's the sort of central protagonist, I guess. And so you see him as a much more flawed character.
Mm,
So, and sometimes you think, oh yeah, he handled that very well, and sometimes you think, oh, he completely messed that up.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
the great thing about the film is that he's a very human character,
yeah,
and yeah, his heart is basically in the right place, and he's not the sort of completely crazy headmaster of type from the earlier film, but he does make mistakes, and which is which and you can sort of that makes it quite discussable film. It reminded me
mm,
in that respect of uh, Carnage. Have you seen Carnage?
mm,
Which is a Roman Polanski film, and it comes from a screen play by a French playwright called Yasmina Reza, and also the other French film that reminded me of is Anatomy of a Fall, where
mm.
there's a sort of situation where you can sort of discuss it quite a lot. What's happening here? Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I don't know if that.
That's a very good film, actually. Anatomy of a Fall. Yeah,
Yeah, it's really good. I think that won the Palme d'Or as well. And
okay.
but Carnage still really good, I think,
Yeah,
and it's good because they're debating the sort of situation, what's right, and that's the similarity I think with here, or what is the sort of the nature of this thing,
mm,
which is not clear exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, really terrifically good. And the other thing that I really liked about it is as you say, there's these few moments of sort of connection because there's a
yeah,
lot of it. And I mean, if I was him, I'd I would struggle to keep my temper.
yeah.
Basically.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Really annoying, really annoying students, and but there's some bits where he connects, like with Suleiman, where he shows his pictures, and
mm,
there's another bit where they're reading Anne Frank, the Diary of Anne Frank, and so at first they're sort of like, what's this got to do with me? I don't care about this, and then gradually, as they read it a bit more, they actually pay attention to it, and they realize this is actually just like me,
mm,
and it's actually a really good sort of book. And it's funny that the sort of the general banter and sort of mayhem of the classroom sort of pipes down a little bit, but very much like in that presentation bit in Kes, where he's talking about training the kestrel, and so everybody's sort of listening, and engaged and connecting, and
mm.
it's a great bit of the film as well. I really like that.
Yeah, and there's lots of moments like that, but like you say, there's lots of moments too where it kind of breaks down because
Yeah,
his style of teaching is a little bit sort of confrontational in itself, in that he really sort of questions their questions, doesn't he?
yeah,
Sometimes he'll ask a question and say, "Hey, do you know what this is?" And then their response elicits from him, "Well, actually, think about what you just said. What did you do? What did you just
yeah,
do there? Okay, what that word means. Let's look at that." And he does that. So he's kind of very much about kind of putting them on the spot a lot of the time, isn't he?
yeah,
And I mean, you're right. Like, he is really well intentioned, but a lot of the time, it has a lot of these moments where you just kind of go, "Oh, why did he say that?"
yeah,
Or, "Oh, like he was doing really well there, and then he did this."
yeah,
And there's sort of lots of moments like that,
yeah,
especially when he's dealing with those girls. And there's certainly like a key moment when he just completely loses the plot.
yeah.
And it's quite sort of harrowing because you just think, "Oh my God, why did he just say that?"
Yes,
And it's extraordinary.
yeah,
And I also really love the moment in the disciplinary hearing with the mother, because
yes,
it's incredibly telling because here's this what's supposed to be this really official, formal meeting to make a very momentous decision.
Yeah.
Yet there's massive communication gap there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because of the language barrier, and nobody really takes the time to address that.
No.
And it is kind of like they just go through this motion with almost a sort of preordained outcome. And even though Mr. Marin tries to assert himself and say, "Hey, well, wait a minute, are we really doing the right thing here?"
Yeah.
Again, he gets browbeaten down by his peers
Yeah.
into accepting this this formal system that you know is only going to go one way because it only
Yeah.
can do.
Yeah.
And that lack of communication and the inherent unfairness of that process in terms of really giving that family an opportunity to engage and communicate and really discuss the root causes of some of the issues that they're having,
Yeah.
is really telling about how these kind of systems fail kids, you know, and
Yeah.
how some of these things are counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, definitely there. You think. I mean,
yeah,
yeah. The sort of the incident that sets off this disciplinary hearing is. Do you think how did it end up there? How did it end up
yeah.
with disciplinary hearing? It's like, to me, it's like
Well, yeah, because it starts out as a discussion about football, doesn't it? Because obviously some of these kids they take their football and their favorite teams and stuff
yeah,
really, really seriously.
yeah,
Now, obviously, on a personal level, I don't have any sympathy with any of that whatsoever. I just think it's all ridiculous. But they, it's really important to them. And
yeah,
it is extraordinary how quickly that conversation turns ugly and gets out of hand, and how he completely mismanages it.
yeah, yeah,
and uh, and then at the end, even though he makes some incredibly horrendous bad choices, certainly in his words
yeah,
and in how he dealt with that situation as it was developing. It's interesting that he was allowed to make a mistake, and how his boss and his peers tried to cover up or brush aside his failures,
yeah,
yet the students have to pay for their mistakes
yeah,
in some cases in the most serious ways.
yeah,
So I think that shows the imbalance of power
yeah,
in these kind of institutions, that is really quite fascinating.
yeah,
How the film really displays that quite effectively,
yeah,
quite powerfully.
yeah.
So
That's true.
so I think it's brilliant. I think it's just an absolutely brilliant film.
Yeah, it's really good. Very authentic feeling. It seems,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I wonder. I guess one of the chain differences between now and then is they do have these little phones, Nokia's or whatever they are.
yeah.
But so it's 2008. When did the first iPhone come out? 2010 or 11, something like
Uh,
that.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But I mean, yeah, we were at a stage here where it was pre sort of smartphone, like the kind of smartphones that we have now.
Yeah, and I
Um,
wondered how much that sort of what that's the biggest difference I think between then and now.
yeah. Well,
Um,
yeah. I mean, you can imagine how these technology. Because I mean, I'm sure any parent, like we're both parents, and I'm sure I don't know if you have let your kids have phones and computers and stuff yet, but we certainly have, and it's a constant battle with the technology to get them off of it, get
yeah,
them away from it,
yeah,
and it's a completely different way that they kind of engage with the world than perhaps we did,
yeah,
and perhaps even just the kids in this film
yeah,
did. even just this sort of 18, 20 years ago or whatever. So it's amazing how the impact of that technology, because I mean now all my oldest boy, not my oldest boy who's all grown up, but my oldest boy who's still at school,
Yeah.
um, does all his schoolwork and all his homework and everything is given to him on a computer.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And everything he does is on this computer. And so it makes it even more challenging to get him away from it.
Yeah.
Because even when we say, okay, you need to put that computer down for a while, but then if you say, okay, now do your homework, well, he's got to go. He does it on his computer. He's got to go back on his computer. So his whole everything is just engaging on a computer all the time,
Yeah.
or on a phone.
Yeah.
And that you don't see in this film quite yet, but you can see they're in the embryonic stage of that sort of cultural shift that's going to take place just before.
Yeah, because there's no social media. Well, in the film anyway, as I think Facebook would come out by then. Yeah, I think I looked it up just now. It said that the first iPhone with 3G was June 2008. So
there you go.
Basically the same time this film came out, pretty much.
Right. Okay. So this was literally just before all that kicked off and really started to become a thing. Although obviously there was still the internet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But,
present in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. So that makes it kind of an interesting sort of piece as well. But it feels very contemporary in the sense that that's a lot of the issues and things. Yeah, I mean this film really feels like, even though it's set in a educational institution, it feels very much like a microcosm of the wider, society and community that it's part of, doesn't it? And about a lot of the issues and things and the dynamics of the time. And so that's again why I think the film is really, really fascinating and quite powerful. And so I'm really glad I finally got a chance to watch it, because it's absolutely just riveting and fascinating.
Yeah.
Film.
Great performances and
yeah. Well, you can't even, because it doesn't even seem like they're acting. It literally, a lot of the time, like I said, you could literally be forgiven for thinking this was a documentary. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
And even just the handheld camera and the sort of the switching of perspectives and the going out into the playgrounds and shooting it from up high in the windows. So just stylistically and everything, it just really feels very much like a fly on the wall kind of documentary. And I thought it was for years. That was my perception, that it was a documentary.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Interesting.
But then when I finally sat down to see it, I was like, oh, it's not.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely highest recommendation for me. I couldn't recommend a film more highly than The Class.
Yeah, it's good. Very good. Very good. And good one to watch with Kess as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was one of those sort of, situations where we both ended up picking films that really, really gel and go well together and sort of have very, very common threads that run through them, and they fit really, really well together. And I think it's quite interesting too to juxtapose that sort of, North England in 1969 or 68, 69 when the film was made.
Yeah.
And then a French high school in the 2000s.
Yeah.
And to see the similarities and the differences and the cultural differences between the two. So that made it really quite interesting as a pairing as well, I think.
Yeah. There's one sort of maybe trivial difference is that schools have got a lot more colourful, a lot more pictures on the walls. Whereas back in the 60s, all the walls everywhere were bare.
Yeah, bare and bland, sort of, gray or sort of,
blue, pale blue.
Pale blue or that kind of off-white
Yeah.
and just grungy looking, and everything's chipped and dirty and stained.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's interesting because at one point the headmaster, when he's having a go at these kids in his office, he says, "This school is 10 years old." And you think,
Yeah.
what the
Wow.
heck has been going on that it's in that state after 10 years?
Yeah.
Because it looks more like it was, built in, 1846 or something, and
Yeah.
they're still using it.
And at one stage, basically, this scene happens in the playground, and there's this massive mound of coal there.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, literally just a big
Pile of
pile of coal.
coal in the middle of the playground.
Yeah, just extraordinary. And yeah, and there's one moment where the boy, they show him off sitting, on a hillside looking out, but his view is of this big dark smoky mine,
Yeah.
processing plant, this
Yeah.
big ugly
As well.
thing. And my boy made a comment on that. He was sitting watching it with me, that, oh, lovely view he's got there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just sort of like, yeah, God, can you imagine? That's if you go out to walk the dog, that's the kind of view you got.
Hmm.
This big ugly smoking mill. So
Yeah. Yeah.
just extraordinary.
It's extraordinary.
And you think nowadays too, because Kess quite fascinating in the sense that if you look at a lot of the issues that we're having in the UK now with schools about the underfunding,
Yeah.
and then how teachers are struggling, because teachers, I think, is one of the sort of, these people are heroes to
Yeah.
really go out there every day and really try and teach kids and engage them, and it's a thankless task, really, isn't it? And
Yeah.
especially in our society where it's not very highly valued.
No.
And you kind of feel like nowadays, like whether it was from our previous sort of Tory government or our kind of current Tory government that don't call themselves Tories, but it's like they want to get us back to Kess.
Hmm.
That seems to be kind of what they want to do, is sort of get us back to that stage where um, that schools will end up being like that again. That's what it kind of feels like sometimes, that they don't want library. They hate libraries. They hate education. And that's kind of, the kind of level, when you think about the kind of level, I was reading about just chronic underfunding of services to support kids with neurodiversity
Yeah.
or mental health issues and things like that.
Yeah.
Like literally, it is just like a big black hole
Yeah.
with absolutely no support for families or for children. And so you just wonder how many Solomanes are out there who just aren't getting any kind of support
Yeah.
or any proper sort of engagement to help them to overcome some of the barriers that are there to stop them from, you know, um,
Yeah.
succeeding and having a positive outcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you think too, how many people are sitting in prisons now, or having other issues in their lives just because they don't have that support there to help them to overcome those struggles that they're having.
Yeah.
So this is some of the things that come out of these films as well. Some of the questions that you can ask.
Mm.
So
Good. Yeah. All important stuff. Definitely. Yeah.
all right. Was there anything else you wanted to say before we wrapped up?
No, I think that there was, yeah, terrific movie. Works very well with the first one, and thank you for recommending it.
That was my pleasure, and thank you for recommending Kess, because I love it. I love that film, and
Yeah.
I was quite happy to revisit it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully I will get a chance again soon.
Yeah. That's it. So.
But there's a lot of films out there, and we've got more films to talk about.
Definitely.
So, folks, thank you very much for listening in. And of course, we would love to hear from you if you have anything that you'd like to say about the class or about Kess or about some of the things that we talked about on the show tonight. We would love to hear from you. So drop us a comment or, send us a message or, on any of our social media platforms. And we would love to hear from you. So until next time, Jonathan, we'll be back to talk about some more fascinating and interesting films.
Yep.
And we've got some interesting guests that will be joining us in future episodes. So hit that like, follow, or subscribe button wherever it is that you found us, whichever one is appropriate to the situation. Yep. And be sure to join us next time when we'll come back and talk about some more really great films.
Definitely.
All right. So, folks, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show.
Oh, that's the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.